I didn't have a LinkedIn profile until like November of this past year. That just didn't feel like comfortable, I will say. But what I have slowly come to appreciate is that I have suppressed my own voice for quite some time out of fear, out of vulnerability, given my position, given my own personality. I think I have a lot to say. And so I actually think it's been like a nice unleashing of like, oh, this is another way. If I think about it, like this is a way to communicate what I'm thinking about or what I've observed, or it feels kind of satisfying instead of thinking about it just as like self-promotion.
Welcome to Leaving Academia, Becoming a Freelance Editor, the podcast. I'm your host, Paulina Cossette. In 2019, I was a political science professor who was fed up with the stress and hostility of academia, not to mention the low pay. I left my tenure-track job and went from barely surviving to thriving as a freelance academic editor. Today, I own Acadia Editing Services, an editing and coaching business that brings in 6 figures a year. In this podcast, I'll discuss the challenges of academia, what academic editing involves, and what life as a freelancer looks like. If you're willing to jump outside your comfort zone, it is possible to find joy, true flexibility, and a profitable and rewarding career as an academic editor. Thanks for listening. Welcome to Leaving Academia, Becoming a Freelance Editor. Today on the podcast, we have a very special guest, Annie Brubaker. Annie is a member of my group coaching program, Becoming an Academic Editor or Coach. She's also joined us in the Academic Entrepreneurs Studio to continue growing her business. And today we're going to talk with Annie about how she left academia recently, how she got the idea to start her business, and where she's hoping it will go from here. So Annie holds a PhD in English with academic roots in modern American fiction and science and technology studies. She taught writing for 20 years at Wellesley College and at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. In spring 2026, she left academia and launched her editing and coaching business, Annie Brubaker Writing Consulting. And Annie had tremendous success very quickly inside our program. She landed 7 clients during her 12-week BAE cohort, and she's continued to grow the business from there. So we are very excited to hear from you, Annie, about what your strategies were and how you made all that happen in such a short period of time. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with what you did in academia. Tell us about what your role was when you were teaching.
Sure. When I was at the University of Illinois as a grad student, I was in the English department and I taught 2 classes from the very get-go because I had come in with a master's degree. And so that put me slightly ahead in my coursework and right into the classroom where I was teaching business and technical writing to juniors and seniors. And so I had a lot of teaching experience all the way through my graduate time, my time in graduate school. And I also was kind of at the intersection, as you said, between American literature and science and technology studies. And I have always been interested in thinking about how disciplines talk about themselves, how they evolve over time. And so this was something I worked on in my master's program. I was thinking about like the history of literary theory, not just the practice of it, but like how has literary theory evolved over time. And so that was the work I was doing in my PhD program was kind of a continuation of that. And sometimes that presented some challenges because, when you're working in multiple disciplines, sometimes you can kind of find yourself in these gaps where some of the more traditional literary scholars are wanting to pull you back in and pull you back into the canon, ensuring that you're really kind of deep in the field. And then, on the other hand, you're not quite in the other field in a science and technology studies department. And so that was sometimes difficult to navigate.
What led to, like more recently, what led to your decision to leave?
When I came to Wellesley, I was actually still finishing my dissertation. I have a spouse who is also an academic in math, and I was decided I would spend my final year of my PhD program writing remotely and trying to finish. And then in the meantime, when we had moved to Massachusetts from Illinois, there was an opening to teach a couple of classes in the writing program. And so I decided I'd step in and make some money and continue finishing my degree. And it was a very temporary relationship on both sides. I expected that I was going to apply to tenure track roles. I was, actively publishing, trying to get articles out the door, right? I had in mind that I would be part of an English department and that my path was to have a tenure track role. But this was, at the time, this was a couple years past 2008, and the market had just completely tanked. There were maybe two or three jobs that I would see come up that were kind of connected to what I was working on. And so while I did apply and finish my degree and continue on that path, I was still working at Wellesley in the writing program. And then there was an opportunity for a longer term contract that wasn't just a year by year position. And so I ended up taking that. And that's when we kind of decided that we wanted to start a family, that we didn't want to hold off on that part of our lives, and that I would just continue figuring out what that tenure track role was going to look like. But meanwhile, my husband was very happy in his academic role. This was kind of his dream position. And so that limited the scope of my application process. And so once we started a family, I just soon realized like, oh, now I'm just in coping mode. Now I'm just it's like in survival mode. I'm just trying to balance like teaching and childcare. We didn't have full-time care. So I was navigating like a whole new schedule. And it just became untenable to start thinking about another application cycle. And so I decided, you know what, I'm going to just, for now, focus on being the best parent I can be, being the best instructor I can be, and we'll figure it out later. But then, of course, once you get off that track of applying and preparing your materials, it becomes harder to get back into that mode. And so there was a period of time, maybe 4 or 5 years into my time teaching in the writing program, where I realized, okay, maybe this is permanent, right? Maybe there is a pathway. There's some precedent for people having long-term non-tenure track roles, even in not only just within Wellesley, but within the writing program. And so I thought, okay, like maybe I started to talk myself into the idea that maybe this was even better than what I had imagined a tenure track role was going to be. I had a lot of discretion about what I wanted to teach. So I got to teach courses on science fiction and things that were near and dear to my intellectual background. I taught a course called Staging Science that was about plays that depict scientists and scientific themes. I was teaching American women writers. I got to teach a course called Data for Humans, which is all about, again, things that I was thinking about in my dissertation work and in my research. So there was a lot to like, and the students were fantastic. They were so interesting and really hardworking and just incredible students. And so I felt like yeah, maybe this is my path, and I just didn't realize it. And so, yeah, I would say there was like a number of years there where that was the plan.
And so what happened?
So then around, I think it was 2019, I had been starting to take on more committee work. I really value growing in a role, like having the opportunity not just to do the same thing over and over, but really to feel a sense of momentum and growth. And I think that happens. I think non-tenure track faculty don't have the built-in structure of promotion and a sense of moving up a ladder, right? You have more of a sense of stagnation if you're lucky, right? I mean, many adjuncts and non-tenure track faculty, feel the instability of year-to-year changes in their contracts and things like that. I think for teach long-term non-tenure track teaching focused faculty, the threat of stagnation is very real, right? Because you're mostly teaching the same kinds of classes. And so I tried to take on a lot of extra things. Like I want to develop myself as a teacher. I took on the role of the writing tutor coordinator. So I was training and supervising our peer writing tutor program. Again, doing committee work, doing lots of advising. And then around 2019, there was a memo that came out about the fact that the non-tenure track faculty's salary, the base salary, had been frozen in 2008 and had not been adjusted for 12 years. And it's one of those things where like you don't talk about salary, right? You feel very vulnerable. It's sort of, inappropriate to sidle up to somebody and say, "Hey, how are you feeling about what you're getting paid?" Right? That doesn't feel like a comfortable conversation in almost any context, but certainly in academia. But the memo made that very clear that something was going wrong and that the budget crisis was being adjusted kind of on the backs of non-tenure track faculty. So this led to more open conversation amongst ourselves, right? And we started saying this is unacceptable. Like we live in one of the most expensive places to live in the United States. Childcare here is among the most expensive in the United States. And we're also doing so much as non-tenure track faculty at this small college. We make up 30% of the faculty. We're teaching 40% of the classes. These are rough estimates, but a substantial amount. We're advising, we have thesis students, we have summer research. The line between the tenure track and non-tenure track was feeling more and more tenuous, especially around COVID with retirements and illness and all these things. And so we started organizing and talking to people, and we ended up having a meeting. This eventually led to writing a letter. And one of the things actually I've been reflecting on a lot is how writing was so integral to our organization tactics, right? That we had to like spend a lot of time writing all through the organizing process. Like what was the problem? What did we want to see? How were we going to help people understand what we were asking for? And all of that, of course, needed to be channeled through conversation, one-on-ones, group meetings, but really through writing. So I was getting to write in this really different way while we were going through the organizing process. But it culminated after writing this letter, it culminated in a meeting with the provost. And they ended up adjusting our salaries, but that also was timed with when the college was closing due to COVID. And the fears, I think, were really real. And the adjustment felt inadequate to this 12-year wage stagnation. And so then in the years following, we did lots of different things. We tried to use all the the existing channels of faculty governance to try to make inroads. We, showed up to AAUP meetings and we had a committee that represented non-tenure track faculty. We were trying to, get involved with having these conversations with non-tenure track faculty, with tenure track faculty. And finally, in the summer of, I think it was 2021, we started considering the idea of unionizing. So there was not an existing union on campus other than the maintenance and service workers union on campus. And what we weren't sure about was whether non-tenure track faculty at a private institution could unionize. And so that was a whole process of learning about what would it look like if we did this and would it be doable, right? And so within a few months of realizing that we could do it, we had a majority of our non-tenure track faculty say, yes, I'm on board. I would support this. I would want to do this. So it was basically a year from the time that we started conceptualizing this until our union was formed and certified. And then we spent a year bargaining, and that was really challenging, interesting to see what kind of the barriers were. I remember many meetings where we were arguing over whether they could provide ergonomic chairs or not, or whether, well, there was other discussions about we had an AI policy and really it was just a protective policy to say that AI tools won't replace our labor. And the college wasn't really interested in, putting that into writing. It felt like things were still evolving too fast and a faculty committee should be the one to really kind of determine that. But it was just surprising the things that, seem like basic needs and rights that we were, arguing over at the bargaining table. So long story short, we ended up in the spring of last spring, so 2025, right? We ended up going on strike, and the strike lasted 29 days. And that I think was kind of the breaking point. I already knew that I was reaching a point where personally I felt like my growth, my potential for growth in the role was diminishing, and that there were fewer opportunities to teach other kinds of classes outside of the first year writing classes. I was already feeling like I was doing a lot of work and not getting valued or compensated for it in the way that I wanted to. But on the flip side, I think the union effort was teaching me different kinds of work can be satisfying. And I was taking on a leadership role and I was excited about the writing that I was doing in that context. And so there was kind of both of those things going on at the same time that I was learning, like there are other things that are satisfying besides like my typical teaching and faculty role. But also I'm noticing kind of the disconnect I'm starting to feel with the way that the institution is handling things. And I'm happy to talk a little bit more about what happened during the strike and why that was kind of a turning point.
Yeah, I want to highlight some of the stuff that you said about this journey because I think it really illustrates the way that academic institutions and administrators see faculty. Because I think that this is a really important point for people to understand is that we are told in graduate school and in as junior faculty when you're coming in through orientation, there is a socialization process that we are put through where we are convinced and sold on this idea that education is the most important thing in the world and that as college faculty you're shaping the next generation and that we should give everything we have to this institution because it's our family and we're all part of the family. We're all on the same team. We're all working towards these shared goals. And then when you have things come along like COVID, which is, a huge disruptor, but also things like asking for an ergonomic chair in your office, right? Which feels like should be a very small, it's a very small ask. The answer is no, right? Or there's significant pushback. And a huge point that I have struggled to wrap my mind around that you also mentioned is that in my conversations with people like you as they come into the program, I have realized that I landed my first, or I'm sorry, I landed my second tenure track job in 2017. It was at a liberal arts college on the East Coast in a small town, and I was paid 62,000 a year for a 3-3 load in political science, which felt okay back then. But what I have learned is that we're now almost 10 years later and people are getting the same offers. They're getting offered the same amount of money for that teaching load or higher after almost 10 years. So, like, where is all the money going? Like the tuition has been increasing steadily. Where is all the money going if it's not? And that's for tenure track. So, I
Mhm.
can imagine the frustration of being non-tenure track and taking on all this extra work and then finding out that for 12 years, the pay has not changed. That's just, it's insanity. And we put up with it because I believe because we're socialized into this idea that we have to sacrifice everything for this family, but the family doesn't really give a fig about us. When the we look behind the curtain, they're pulling all the strings and they don't actually care about us.
Right. And I think that, like, what's confusing is that to a person, you're amongst nice colleagues who are lovely people and supportive. And it sort of is difficult to confront this benevolent employer myth because that seems to be the face of it. But I think that in these moments where you realize that, like, you're replaceable in the administration's mind, that the institution isn't a family, and I think that's a really damaging idea that academia kind of cultivates. And so it can be confusing to kind of sort out what you see on a day-to-day basis, which is your interaction with people and kind of the institutional operation behind it that is unwilling to give you that ergonomic chair or certainly doesn't want to promise that in writing.
I think a lot of these people too, like I remember dealing with the provost, who was a former professor herself or was still a professor, but like now in her provost role. And you think that, well, she's former faculty at this college, so she cares about us and she understands what we're going through and she's going to fight for us. But then and she looks you in the eye and talks about how much she cares about you and wants you to be happy here and all this stuff. But then when it comes to salary negotiations or teaching load negotiations, you realize that she's working for the machine. Like she's
Right.
sold
Right.
out and she's working for the institution to keep it afloat. And she really doesn't care about you as much as as much as you thought.
Yeah, I think it does probably require some depersonalization in order to do that job effectively, right? Like suddenly your primary customer, so to speak, is the institution itself and protecting it and making sure it keeps running and the classes are filled and and I think that creates a kind of depersonalization or abstraction of what's really happening. And it can be painful, especially when somebody's moving from like a faculty role into an administrative role.
What was the final result of all this, of all these negotiations? What ended up happening?
Yeah, so after 29 days of being on strike, our union decided to call off the strike because the college was going to take away health insurance because they have the right to do that after a 30-day period. And that was going to make people too vulnerable in our group. And so we decided we would end the strike. And so we still had a week left of the semester. So we returned to meet our students again after, a long time of being out of the classroom. And then from there, we entered mediation. So over the summer, the union met with the college to make progress. And at the end of the summer, we reached a first contract. And it really is a strong first contract. It included meaningful raises. We changed our titles to teaching professors, which is surprisingly meaningful. I never liked the term non, that we were a non entity, that we were a negative, an absence of something, because it wasn't who we felt we were as educators and faculty members. And so that was amazing. We made grievable cases of discrimination and harassment. So above and beyond, like using the Title IX office, for example, if a member of our union is experiencing discrimination and harassment, they can go to the union to discuss it. And that's really meaningful because sometimes it doesn't feel comfortable to share, of course, what's happening. And it may be something having to do with the fact that you are non-tenure track. And so that was really an amazing thing. So I feel so proud of what we accomplished together. It was really, really hard. It was painful. It continues to be something that the campus is still working through and processing, especially now that, the contract is binding. It's a legally binding document. So now everyone in our community is having to look at those rules and stipulations. But I'm really so proud of what we accomplished together to make Wellesley a healthier community going forward. And I'm not leaving defeated. Like I think that's important to say too, that, I'm not bitter. I'm so grateful for the relationships I made while I was there. I still am connected to many students that I worked with. I'm leaving with my head held high and feeling like I put in my all for 15 years, but now it's time for me to launch into this next thing.
Yeah. Well, you
Yeah.
mentioned that your role in the union and those efforts opened your eyes to realizing that you could get joy and fulfillment out of different kinds of jobs or different kinds of roles. So, at what point did you start thinking about starting an editing business?
Yeah. So I think that for me, I kind of needed to separate the decision of am I really seriously thinking about leaving and why? And does that feel right and why? From the decision of like, and what do I want to do next? Right. And I think at first I thought those had to be tied up together. I thought I had to know exactly what I was going to do before leaving. And so actually, while we were on strike, I was starting to think about applying to other jobs, like entering another system, right? A kind of known job that I could say, okay, I'm leaping from this to that. And then I sort of realized this is too much. I'm overwhelmed already. I'm literally standing on the sidewalk in the rain of my campus because we couldn't be on campus. We had to be on the boundary of campus. And so that was also really profound, like kind of looking at the institution from the outside, so to speak. I was already kind of like on the outskirts of the campus. But here I was like thinking maybe I would just get another type of job, maybe in the nonprofit sector or some type of business role that had something to do with education. And then again, quickly realized like I just need to make the decision of whether I want to leave first and then try to think about what I want to do. So I ended up taking a leave of absence to give myself that time. And in the summer, I stumbled on a workshop that you were actually in. You were a participant. And then Catherine Wiley, who's also an academic editor. And then I believe there was a third person in that workshop. But I was just curious. I thought, oh, this sounds interesting. I want to know more about this. I always thought that editing had to happen in the space of a publishing company or a business. I knew that there were life coaches and career coaches, of course, but I didn't think of the idea of like an independent academic writing coach or editor. And so as soon as I saw you talking about your stories of, all of you were in tenure track roles in academia and left for different reasons, but reasons that felt really like they resonated with me because I was also in this process of deprogramming myself from a lot of these myths and ideas about what this job and lifestyle was going to be like. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is kind of what I think I want to do. I love the idea of not being a part of a system, getting a lot of ability to have self-determination, control over my schedule, building something that's mine, that like no one gets to define it or take it away and I think that felt like this powerful antidote to the feelings of like discouragement, like profoundly discouraged about what was going on in my role.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that you don't have to. I think we often think that there's two choices. There's academia or there's industry. And for people in writing and the social sciences and those fields, what does industry even mean? Like, yeah, it's getting a low paying job as an editor or something at a publishing company or a journal or whatever. But it's not dichotomous, right? There are many options out there. And I understand that, starting a business can be very scary, particularly for people who don't have a spouse that they can rely on for health insurance, which is a benefit I have. We get our health insurance through my husband's job. And so there are risks to it, but it is also, I think, the most freedom that you could ever possibly have because you get to
Yeah.
choose, like you were saying, when do I work? Where do I work? Who do I work with? If you decide today that you hate doing the type of editing you've been doing, you can then go change it and do something else. And
Mhm.
you don't really
Yeah.
have to answer to anybody other than your clients, of course, but you're going to do a good job for them anyway because you're a good person. And I think people who go into this business genuinely want to provide the best service they can. So yeah. So how talk to us about that part of the journey. So you heard me speaking. I assume you probably started investigating the program at that point, or how did you decide to enroll and do this thing?
Yeah. So I think that little spark started, I was getting excited about thinking about what this could be like, why I might like it, why it would be a continuation of much of what I had done through my entire career. I know you've talked about this quite a bit, that like the skills we build are really a kind of natural foundation for moving into a role like this. And that was so true for me. I mean, I worked one-on-one with writers for 20 years. That's what I did. And I also worked with faculty on their writing along the way. And this just felt like, oh, I can envision what this looks like already. And that part I love, that like one-on-one interaction and helping people, work through their ideas and make progress on their writing and their thinking. Like that never went away, right? And so I could see a lot of like it was nice not to feel like I needed to re-credential myself or go back to school or start from the bottom, right? That there could be kind of more of like a natural jumping off point. And funnily enough, like in the spirit of like, if you build it, they will come, I started by changing this office space. Like I started envisioning, I went on Facebook Marketplace and I got like one of those desks, the like, standing desks that can move up and down. And I tried to picture it first. And so I like fixed up this room a little bit. And I did that even before I like registered for your course or anything. Like I just wanted to kind of like try on what does this feel like to be at home in this space? And it's mine. It's my space. I designed it the way I want it to be. I started thinking about names for the editing business. At first, I thought that I wanted to name it something that was not associated with my name. I had these ideas like Draftwell editing services, which I still like, but I think I ultimately landed with my name for really like a lot of reasons, I think, but mostly because I wanted to feel like I could take ownership of this, that it was mine. I wanted that feeling of self-determination that I didn't feel like I had in my career. And so that's kind of like something I was toying with. And then I registered for your BAE course months in advance of when it started. Like I think it was starting in January, but I was like signed up by November. I mean, I was ready. So I felt like I was trying to work toward that even before I got going. But I think there's so many things that I learned that I didn't know before I took your course. I think as academics, we're used to feeling like, okay, we're self-sufficient. We can do the research and launch into this. We're capable. We can. And so I think that I could see how there might be temptation to kind of go it alone. But having gone through the course, I recognize how much faster I was able to bring this together and how much I didn't know about marketing, about running a business. Like I knew the writing side of it and how I would work with people and that felt really comfortable. But in terms of like how was I going to make this like an operational thing and get the word out there, I really didn't know beforehand.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And so many, I mean, you know this because you've been in the program. So many people come into the program and have so much self-doubt. And I think that's a huge barrier to taking the leap, is just worrying, like, am I going to be able to do this? I'm not sure I can do this. But then there's the other side of that, which is, okay, I'm going to do this, but I can't spend any money to learn how to do it, right? And so people think, well, I've always just muscled through and I've done things on my own. So if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it myself and I'm going to figure it out. And yeah, you absolutely can do that. I mean, I did it. Other people do it. Like I didn't, there is, as far as I know, there is no other program that teaches, as specifically what we teach in BAE, focused on editing and, becoming an editor and a coach. And so I didn't have the option to take a course on it. So I listened to hours and hours of podcasts on marketing, and I read all the marketing books, and I spent months and months thinking, how do I put myself in front of my ideal clients, and I experimented and I failed and I experimented again. And like, yeah, you can do that, but it's going to take you 2 years before you get a steady stream of clients going. Or you can pay what's the equivalent of one, maybe two clients, if you get some good projects and you can and land the clients starting in your cohort, in the first 12
Yeah.
weeks and start getting the ball rolling that way. So yeah, I think it is like, yes, we can muscle through it, or you can invest a little bit in yourself, less than what someone would pay for like a big screen TV these days and start faster, right? And start with a lot less stress and be part of a community of people who are just like you, who support you and are cheering you on the whole way. I know it's hard to pinpoint what exactly you did, to land those
Uh-huh.
first clients during your cohort. But looking back, I know you were definitely, I don't want to say a hustler because I never got the impression that you were like burning yourself out or anything, but I know you were definitely very engaged from the beginning. doing
Yeah.
the things, like not letting the fear stop you. I know it felt uncomfortable, but you just pushed through it. You said, I'm just going to do these things and go for it, which is exactly what you have to do. Looking back in your mind, what would you say were the keys to your early success?
Mm. Well, I think I will say that, everybody who might be on this same journey or thinking about this will have their own pace. I mean, you said this too, like there's no right way to do this. Some people are, in their academic role and starting to build something at the same time. I mean, I do recognize that some of what was going on for me was that I had a chance to recharge and get well after a really tough kind of couple of years. And then that, I had reserves, but I also had the motivation that this was now my only thing, right? And so I both had time and kind of was re-energized to put, so I recognize that that's somewhat a part of it. But I also think like one thing that and a friend had mentioned this concept of the minimum viable product. And I really surprised myself by embracing that because I do have had perfectionist tendencies when it comes to like my own writing or putting things out there. But that really helped me. Like I think just realizing that like everything is a process, everything is editable, everything is changeable now. I don't have a boss saying like, that you didn't do well on that. You need to improve on this or like, so I think that that freedom to play, to experiment, to realize like my website doesn't need to be perfect before I send it out. I can start sharing what I'm doing with people. I think that that spirit of like knowing, trusting that I could always go back and change things was really, really helpful for me. And also just, yeah, networking, like talking to lots of people. One of the naysaying comments I got when I was thinking about this was, why would you want to work by yourself? Like you are such a social person and you love community and and that worried me because I thought, well, yeah, what if I do becomes, much more closed off and lonely in this work? Well, that is not what is happening, right? I get all the socialization I need and probably more actually than I than I was in my faculty role. But talking to people like just almost every week of the time I was in BAE, I had some kind of informational interview, was getting practice in talking to people about what I'm doing. So I think those things were really, really important.
And how did you land those conversations? Were you reaching out? You said informational interviews. So were you reaching out to other people, to like other editors to get to know them? Were you striking up conversations with potential clients? And if so, where did you find them? Like what was it that was leading to those first clients?
Yeah. So I all of that you mentioned, I reached out to a former BAE member. I think you had put me in touch with someone who was in the first cohort. And so we met and have continued to meet actually and talk through this. I reached out to, part of my editing business is working with nonprofit organizations and providing some professional communication and writing. And so I was reaching out, for example, to local organizations to have a conversation. And not everyone would take me up on it, but some people for sure. I was talking to people who already do this work, like, grant writers who are embedded in their organization, talking about what their experience has been like, reaching out to other editors. I also had some success with cold emailing folks. So I Early on, I had sent a message to a person who was the head of an EDD program at a local institution. And so we had a conversation about what might it look like for me to provide support for students in that program. And so, yeah, I think that, it just being proactive about reaching out and having these conversations and telling people what I'm doing. And it doesn't always mean like a client comes out of it or a clear path about how we're going to work together. But I do believe that just kind of like sprinkling yourself and having these conversations will come back in some way or another, right?
Yeah, I think that's really crucial, especially in the first weeks of starting your business, is a basic fact that if people don't know you exist, they can't hire you or they can't tell other people about you. And so in those earliest days, we really have to think about for whatever our business is, who are the people who would be most likely to hire us or to connect us to people who can hire us, like you mentioned the head of the EDD program, and how do we put ourselves in front of them? That can be online, right? That can be posting on LinkedIn. That can be communicating with people in Facebook groups. There are a million PhD grad student type groups or academic faculty, whatever type groups. That can be having conversations with people locally, reaching out to, if you live in a city, especially reaching out to local universities and just saying, hey, can we hop on a quick 15-minute Zoom call and, talk about what the options are. But yeah, I think a lot of people who struggle early on do so because they get in a rut and they try, one or two or three options. Maybe they send, 15, 20 cold emails and then they make a couple posts on LinkedIn and then, maybe they try something else and they don't hear back, right? But like 15, 20 cold emails isn't enough, like that's just not enough eyeballs on your content. And there's an element of luck there, right? Like, am I going to happen to cold email a person who is genuinely interested in working with me versus 15 or 20 people who have no interest in it? But I think that's where the numbers game comes in, is the more you keep doing this, the more avenues that you go down, you will eventually find your audience and you'll eventually find the marketing mechanism, whether it's LinkedIn or cold email or whatever, that works for you. Like, we all have different voices, we all have different personalities. And so somebody who's fantastic at posting on LinkedIn and gets tons of views there may not be so great at interpersonal conversations or, cold emails or something, and vice versa. So I think we have to try all the different marketing options and keep at it until we have a sufficient number of, a sufficient sample size, I guess, to
Yeah.
decide what is working for us and what's not.
One thing that reminds me of that I've tried to embrace, and I think this comes up in the book Atomic Habits, which you might have heard of. It's a pretty well popular kind of self-help motivation book, but they talk about systems instead of results, right? Like building systems that work for you. And I like that idea when it comes to marketing because, as opposed to thinking about what's the effect that this post is having, or what's the result of this cold email, or did anyone get back to me? Did this lead to and I need to remind myself of this on a regular basis. But I think just thinking like build a system of, sending things out and the results will come eventually, like trust that and focus on that instead of and I think you talk about this really effectively in the BAE class because you're focusing on like how do you create LinkedIn posts and how do you communicate those in work in batches or work more efficiently. So those are all like systems, like processes that will work well for getting the word out.
Yeah, you have to keep the machine running even when it
Yeah.
feels like it's not working. Because if you turn the machine off, it's definitely not going to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I will say like I am a person who was like many academics nervous about using LinkedIn. I didn't have a LinkedIn profile until like November of this past year. I I was that just didn't feel like comfortable, I will say. But what I have slowly come to appreciate is that I have I have suppressed my own voice for quite some time out of fear, out of vulnerability, given my position, given my own personality. I think I have a lot to say. And so I actually think it's been like a nice unleashing of like, oh, this is another way. If I think about it, like this is a way to communicate what I'm thinking about or what I've observed, or it feels kind of satisfying instead of thinking about it just as like self-promotion.
Hmm. I love the way that you just frame that because I think that is also one of the most freeing parts of having your own business. You know, we think about the schedule flexibility and the geographic flexibility and all that, but yeah, I was somebody who for my entire life did everything I was supposed to do. And, you know, that's why I was so good in school. I did all the teachers loved me, right? I did ticked all the boxes. I did everything I was told exactly as I was told. And it worked for a long time. But under all that, I was terrified to say what I thought because I was perceived as too much or too opinionated or too whatever. And when you have your own business, no matter how weird you are, and I am plenty weird, as anybody who listens to me knows, it doesn't matter, you know? Who cares? Like you get, and maybe it's because I turned 40 last year, but I also don't have any shits left to give. But, you know, like who cares? Like just say what you think and because you have value, right? People worry about coming off salesy and not being authentic. And I say, you can't not be authentic when you're talking about your own life and your own
Mhm.
reflections on your life and the things that you've learned and how you've changed and you know the clients you've supported and so just talk about yourself and you can't fake that. And yeah, it's just so freeing to get to a place where you can share your ideas and share your opinions and stop trying to put yourself in that box that society expects you to live inside. And your people will find you, you know, like, yeah, I'm sure I turn plenty of people away who don't like my style or whatever, but that's fine. I don't want to work with people who don't like me. So, yeah, I really love how you articulated that. So, tell us about your business today and the types of people you work with, and tell us how everybody can get in touch with you.
Sure. So my business provides editorial services. So that might look like traditional copy editing, developmental editing, or proofreading. And also I am doing some coaching around, like motivation and kind of assessing goals and things like that. That I've had fewer clients that are focused on that in particular, although I think developmental editing clients often do want that kind of support too, like how to move through a long process effectively, how to stay accountable, things like that. And I'm mostly working with scholars in the humanities and social sciences. And one thing that's been exciting for me is that some folks with a science and technology background, or STS as we typically refer to it, they have found me. And so that's been really exciting to see that my like disciplinary specialization is something that is attracting some clients. I've been working with PhD students on their dissertation. I have a couple of new clients who are working on the kind of dissertation to book process. And that I think I've realized is like such a gap in mentorship in academia that, when you're moving from your PhD and the this kind of close relationship with your advisors, that sort of starts to disappear a little bit. You feel like you can't tap into those resources of your committee members as much because they're moving on to new students and you're moving on to whatever kind of academic role that you are taking on. So I've been appreciating the fact that like that's a really tough moment for a lot of people, like figuring that out, largely alone. And that's where people like us can kind of come in and help navigate that. I just had a client reach out about a memoir. So I am interested in working with people who are doing kind of nonfiction or personal essay writing. That's something I've been trying to do more of myself. So that will be exciting. And then my hope is that I can continue nurturing the working with nonprofits. I think it's very easy to show that I have a scholarly background and can work with scholarly writers, and a little bit more of a leap to show that those academic skills and the professional writing and grant writing teaching I've done translates to working with nonprofits. But I'm okay with that. I'm okay with like nurturing it on a longer term scale and focusing now on just finding those clients and working with academic writers.
That's wonderful. It's always a joy to talk with you, but it's so great to have you on the podcast. It's been so lovely to get to know you and to have you in the program and in the studio to continue to grow your business. And I'm just so happy for you. I know it's not easy, right? Day to day, it can be hard. It can be a grind. It can be a hustle. But looking back, it's barely June right now when we're recording. And looking back 6 months ago, to think how far you've come and your life has transformed in 6 months, and seeing that growth and how happy you are. That's why I do this. It just makes me so happy to see people take finally have the life that you've always wanted and that you deserve. So I'm so proud of you. I congratulate you. And tell us your website, how people should get in
Yeah.
touch with you if they want to work with you.
Yes, so it's abwritingconsulting.com. So that's how you can find me. And I also just want to say I'm so grateful to you for being a partner in this journey and teaching me so many things and encouraging me. And, I wish that I had known when I started to just, sort of trust the process. I know that's become cliche, but I think just, I had a lot of fear that maybe I would build it and no one would come. And I needed to trust that if I worked hard and put myself out there, that it would work. And I am so happy. Like this is such an exciting thing. And I feel like I'm building something and I have community and I have support. And that's amazing. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Annie. If you're unhappy in academia and you think you might be a good editor or writing coach, check out my course, Becoming an Academic Editor. This digital course is paired with a 12-week group coaching program to support you through your decision to leave academia or not, and to start building a profitable and rewarding academic editing business. Learn more by going to acadiaediting.com/become an editor. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time.